Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 80-something episode of the 706 podcast, the long-running, award-winning, Peabody Award-winning, Nobel Prize-winning, EGOT-winning podcast from the twisted minds that brought you Simon Killer Reviewed, in which we try to determine the 706 greatest films ever made by humans on Earth. We're slowly but surely making our way there. Today, we're going to be talking about a movie from 2020 called Riders of Justice. Before we get started, I'm going to allow my co-hosts to introduce themselves, and let's go in alphabetical order. That always seems to work out okay.
Anthony. Connor. I'd just like to say happy holidays. But no, wait, I take it back. Happy Saturnalia, everybody. It's getting harder and harder to say that these days, but it's the true reason for the season. Don't forget Saturn.
This is Kirk, and as you may have seen, based on my recent Twitter poll, I will be stepping down from the 706 podcast. I will be replacing Elon Musk as chairman of Twitter. So my first order of business is to ban all anime and K-pop references.
Thank you, Kirk. And frankly, it's long overdue. In the meantime, we will be replacing Kirk with an AI based on his prior statements and opinions on this program. It's in beta currently, but I feel like we can get within 95% accuracy according to early tests. And focus groups actually tremendously prefer the AI to actual Kirk. That figures. So, all right. So let's get started. This movie is from 2020. It is a Danish film starring Mads Mikkelsen. It is directed by Anders Thomas Jensen. I've not seen any of his other films, but Jensen is sort of affiliated or associated with the Dogma 95 movement of the 90s. He co-wrote one of the Dogma films and is kind of in those circles. He's known mostly as a screenwriter, but has directed a handful of features. He also wrote the screenplay for the Dark Tower film, which I have not and probably will never seen. However, this is a movie from 2020 he did that tackles themes of kind of fate and trauma all through the kind of vehicle of an action revenge thriller, is how the best way I can kind of describe it. And I'll give a brief little synopsis. Mads Mikkelsen is a soldier who is stationed in Afghanistan. His wife suddenly dies tragically in a subway accident. So he comes home to be with his teenage daughter and help her cope with this loss. And he's approached by a man who believes that due to the presence of an informant for the government on the train who was going to testify against the leader of this biker gang who died in the accident, that the overwhelming mathematical probability is that it was not an accident and that it was in fact the train was sabotaged in some way by this biker gang. So Mads Mikkelsen and his group of new friends starts to go on their mission of revenge. And the title Riders of Justice is the name of the biker gang. It also is sort of impliedly the name it assigns to our heroes or our anti-heroes. They're seeking justice, they're seeking vengeance. So that's sort of my introduction for as far as the plot and kind of what the movie is. Now, as far as like kind of first takes, why don't we go with Kirk, since Kirk picked this one and I kind of pitched this movie with Kirk in mind. So Kirk, what did you think of Riders of Justice?
Yes, thanks, Tony. So yeah, this was a good film. I have to say it was slightly different. I guess the beats hit differently than I thought they would. I think you pitched it and it's categorized as a comedy. There's kind of like these absurdist comic elements, but to me, there wasn't too much to laugh at. There are some very somber moments, some very grim kind of harrowing moments, and it's very difficult for me to really attach myself to projects where there's such a kind of blending of genres and styles. So that was a little bit difficult to manage as a viewer. That's just kind of like my initial overall feeling. And then, of course, I wanted to connect. I wanted the themes to resonate with me, and I wanted to feel like I understood what the movie was trying to say. And, I think it's quite an eloquent film, and I think it gets very messy, and there's so much going on that, in terms of just the individual arcs of each character, as well as how they all interact and form some sort of semi-cohesive whole. It's a little puzzling. And I think kind of what I, took away from it is that there's really certainly a lot to be said about, the causality and of certain adverse events and how that plays into our understanding of grief and loss and healing. And, we look to attribute and assign blame. And I think there's these dogmatic perspectives that are like deterministic. And then there's like a nihilistic perspective, or that's not really nihilism, but I guess to an extent, like that these things don't matter, or you can't control them, so they don't matter to an extent. Maybe that's not really what they were trying to say, but they were kind of playing with this idea, right, of fate, of the importance of understanding why things happen. And in doing so, they were exploring this relationship between Mads Mikkelsen, the main character, and his daughter. And I felt like that relationship was really heartfelt from the writer's perspective, not on the screen, right? But like, I could really feel the palpable post-climactic tension after this huge loss. And you can tell that this character doesn't really know his daughter at all. And he's from a world where there's actions and consequences, and there's goals and objectives and directives. And he's kind of trying to paint with a certain logic that doesn't really apply to the brain of an adolescent, right? It doesn't apply to these unspeakable, horrific events that seem beyond measure. So for me, I think it's just, the idea that these things can happen, and that, yes, people can make decisions, and those decisions can end up altering the course of many lives, of an untold number of lives. And I think, it's empowering in a sense, right, for us to understand that. And also there's some humility that's to be learned, in the sense that we don't really have too much. We have control over what we can do, but we don't really understand what the ramifications of our actions will be. So, I think it's a really clever film in that way. It wasn't quite what I was expecting. I was expecting, some of the humor. It isn't what I'm used to, right? And it's like, if you play board games, there's European strategy games, and there's American strategy games. And American strategy games are like, oh, we're going to blow up the zombies. And European strategy games are like, oh, we're going to save coal and wheat, and we're going to use this to, invest in architecture. And it's just two different worlds. And I really felt that more than like the other two Danish films that we've, or at least I've seen recently, which were Another Round and The Hunt. You could feel that there was a little more discordance in this film, but also some humorous beats that really didn't land for me. It kind of felt like I was on the outside looking in that respect. But, I will say it's a good film. I just don't really know how to characterize it, like how to typify it, where to put it in the filing cabinet, right? And is that a good thing? Is that ultimately an asset? Maybe a film is more enjoyable when we know exactly what it is, and we come out enjoying it for what we thought it would be. And so that's maybe a shortcoming on my part. And not to say I didn't enjoy it. It's different. So it's kind of disorienting at the same time. But I will say in closing, Tony pitched this as a Christmas movie, and this is right up there with the Christmas classics, The Grinch, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. This movie was just Christmas through and through.
Kirk, I said it was Christmas adjacent. I very specifically said that it was not a Christmas movie, but it was Christmas adjacent, which I will stand by. It begins and ends with Christmas music and Christmas themed things.
This is about as Christmas as Mark Strong is Jordanian, all right? Or that one actor in Body of Lies. I forget his name. Anyways, not exactly a holiday film, but it's Danish, so we'll forgive that. Okay, it's a fun ride. I'm interested to hear what my co-hosts and also Tony think of the film, and I'll probably learn a lot because they have different perspectives. And this is a film that feels very much like a prism through which you look at certain things. So,
okay, thank you, Kirk. I will say we have to understand Denmark did not get Christmas until 2008, so they're still figuring it out. But let's go to. I know Connor has seen this before, so why don't we do Anthony next?
All right. First of all, let's see. I don't know how to begin this. I'll say, to start off, I watched two films recently with, family. Sweet Girl, the Netflix, forgettable action movie with Jason Momoa from Game of Thrones season 1, and Bullet Train. And it's really funny watching those two movies, which are very much Bullet Train, especially kind of hyper Deadpool, goofy action films about, kind of father-child relationships at the heart of it. Sweet Girl, of course, is the kind of American version of this film where a guy kind of goes ballistic and, there's nothing but nonstop action from start to finish. And this movie, of course, as Kirk was kind of getting at, has a kind of European sensibility where it just feels like it wants to take the genre and pull at philosophical, sensible kind of threads of questioning, chance, opportunity, correlation, all these kind of different threads we could think about. And yes, I had to watch this movie yesterday because of time. And while watching it yesterday, I probably would have said that this was a decent film. I probably would have been like, oh, okay, I could see the heart, I could see the goodness of it. But now, actually, 24 hours plus later, I realized they're actually just can't remember whole scenes from the movie. And it's a really funny thing to me because I'm I could remember the general plot. I remember Leonard. I remember the guy who's talking about the club foot and the correlation to blindness or whatever disease it may be. I remember Leonard going to the field and, pulling his pants down. But other moments, I'm just wait, did I watch this recently? Am I okay? And I don't mean that as a discouragement of the film. It's just something about it seemed to have washed over me in a way that leaves me kind of in a weird place where I'm I think it was solid. I think it was okay. And my own reaction just feels kind of lost. I'm it didn't hit me, I guess, on the levels. The neurons weren't firing where I want to talk about these really heavy moments and they're kind of details. Everything else I could think about is just so abstract. It's the questions it raises, I suppose. It's the things Kirk was kind of talking about. It's the stuff I can't quite put my finger on, but the actual examples of the movie just didn't quite hit me the way I thought they would, from the nomination of it and from the hope going into it with a filmmaker I had never seen before movie wise. So I think my general reaction is very mixed, I suppose.
Okay, fair enough. And I thank you for your candor. Yeah, I've definitely had those reactions myself. So I get it. So all right, Connor, bring us home. Tell these wise guys, these wiseacres, set them straight. Just set them straight.
Tony, that is exactly what I'll do. I love this movie. I totally love this movie. It is my second time watching it. Now, what I was going to say is going to be very different. I've kind of had to rethink a lot of what I was thinking I was going to say, but my opening remarks about this movie and my general feeling about it, based on what the other two said, I think what I would have said is this movie is in some ways kind of exemplary. It's kind of perfect, maybe even too perfect. What can I say about it? I mean, it's this amazing blend, first of all, of so many different kind of generic elements and kind of flavors of the comic, the tragic. It can bounce back and forth between these sentimental moments, that are really moving and almost get it to the point of being cheesy. It goes from there to being kind of, bitterly kind of realistic and moments of kind of naturalist film we're used to from kind of like, prestigious European cinema, and then back to, an action movie sequence, and combining all these elements in a way that is ambitious and I think works very well. Think about how every single character has a need and a want. This is kind of like screenwriting 101. Like, all the characters are so kind of well sketched in terms of their like psychology, even to the point of being almost like too explicit in ways. Think of Otto, the character. We first get the idea that he's, probably like comes attached to Matilda, or interested in solving this mystery, because obviously he lost his and it turns out he actually even led to the death of his wife and daughter, right? So it's like all these characters have motivations, everything's explained, everything has cause and effect, and then too, it comes down, it has this kind of humanistic, completely like kind of widely applicable message that is not dogmatic, that sort of it's a feeling. It doesn't come down on one side or the other. There's still room to kind of think and ruminate on these things, but nevertheless, it feels like it comes to a conclusion. And it does all this and subverts the genre of the action film, while also having a satisfying action conclusion where we see Mads Mikkelsen shoot the bad guys. And now we think that's going to be like defeating the purpose, but it's not exactly, because the plot has been written to such an extent that it ends up that really ultimately it's kind of in defense and he's saving the daughter, right? So we somehow managed to both question the motivations of our protagonist, yet also have the satisfying conclusion that we want. I mean, I think that's really like incredible. It's incredible writing. And, I think it's amazing. Now, for me, I was puzzled at first. I was a bit shaken by what Kirk said, that he found it discordant, which totally makes sense because of all the elements that we just mentioned. So I'm trying to think, what was it? Maybe I felt the same way. I think as I'm thinking back to my first watch, maybe when I first saw it, I became hooked on what I felt was like what that was the kind of smart guy, the smart assery of it, right? The cleverness of subverting the genre. Of course, we love that, right? We love to see a genre. I do, I love the meta element of film, right? Commenting on the genre you're writing in, is really interesting to me. I just find it intrinsically kind of, virtuosic, or I say bravo, that's the kind of thing that I would think, to be clever, I would want to write, right? So it does that. Now I have to think maybe that's what got me into the movie. That's what kind of won me the goodwill. And that's why I could follow along to the emotional beats, because I will say, as Kirk said, that there are moments that don't land. There are some comic moments that are a little bit like, a little too far, but there's a lot of them. And if I get any good laughs, I'm happy with it. Everything feels like it has a place. Anyway, so I'm kind of puzzled as to how I can explain, though I think it makes sense that we have these varying reactions. Each of us are completely different, our reactions, but we're kind of talking about the same movie. And I think it's interesting to maybe pick that apart as we go along in this episode.
Yeah, thank you, Connor. That was I think a great articulation of, I think, what makes this movie so special. I think that for me, and I think I was thinking during what Kirk was saying, I think that half of the movie, the experience of watching a movie, is us, right? There's what's on the screen, and then there's us and what we bring to it, right? And a big part of that are our expectations going in, which is why that it's so rare to see a movie attempt what this movie attempts to do. It kind of goes, Connor says screenwriting 101 in terms of giving your characters a want and a need and an arc, and so forth. It's also sort of screenwriting 101 that you convey to the audience very quickly what kind of story it is you're telling. And with that, those sort of generic conventions, and with those archetypal stories, we have certain sort of expectations that we want to be satisfied. Now you can subvert expectations. Maybe you can have a surprising character death or a plot twist or something like that. But it's very rare to have a movie that will change genres, midway through. And for the very good reason that audiences will be confused and upset. They'll feel like they kind of didn't know what they were kind of signing up for. But I think this movie does such an amazing job of kind of covering all those bases, because I think that this solid, like the core of the story and the characters are so rock solid that we can follow along wherever it goes. And like a great moment, that moment Anthony actually mentioned where Leonard is in the field and he takes his pants off. I think that's such an incredible moment, because it's like, to me, like that moment kind of encapsulates what really works about this movie and makes it special, because the whole thing is about causality, the idea that, you know, the butterfly effect, that you can do one thing without even really thinking about it, which will lead to something else happening, which will lead to something else happening, and can have these sometimes you know, cataclysmic, you know, ramifications, you know, and everyone else has their histories, and in the case of this movie, their traumas that they're bringing to their lives and then inform their actions and their behaviors. So Mads Mikkelsen, in sort of his reaction to his trauma, his reaction to his loss, is to shut down and to engage in violence, because violence is the only thing that he understands. So when he's in the car with Leonard and Otto, and they're saying things he doesn't want to hear, his response is to, you know, kick Leonard's ass. And then his response to that, because of his own backstory that we didn't know about, he takes off his pants, and it becomes this, it goes from being almost like a comedic scene to this like brutally sad moment. And like you can see in Mads Mikkelsen's reaction, and I think he's such a great performance in this movie. I mean, everyone in this movie is great, but I think Mads Mikkelsen does such a great job. Very different kind of persona and vibe than you see in something like The Hunt, or like in what's the other one, the one where he's drinking another round, you know, very different kind of guy, and just so tightly controlled and so bottled up. And you can see that moment of like disgust and bewilderment, disgust both at like what must have happened to this guy, and also disgust at himself for, you know, putting him in this situation where he would have that reaction, you know. And that moment happens so organically too. It doesn't feel like a cheap, like bid for sympathy from the audience. It feels like something that had been established, because we'd heard this guy. We can see that this guy is clearly kind of troubled, kind of warped, kind of traumatized. And he alluded in talking to Matilda that he had some sort of, you know, possible sexual abuse in his past. Another thing I love about Leonard too, that I think they handle so well, is the whole fixation on the barn that, you know, again, is played for laughs at first. And it is indeed like pretty funny that like he's so fixated on this barn. He's like, everyone's eager to see the barn. Let's just get to the barn. One of the funniest lines in the movie for me. And then like we find out later why he's fixated on the barn. And you're like, Jesus Christ. But that doesn't retroactively, you know, invalidate the laugh. Like I just think that like the way the movie kind of guides you through that in a way that feels totally fair, to me, is remarkably successful screenwriting. And I think from a directorial standpoint, while, you know, I don't think this movie has exceptional cinematography or exceptional like action scenes necessarily, although I think they're perfectly serviceable, the way he's able to maintain control of the tone and get these performances out of these actors when it really counts speaks to the quality of the directing. But yeah, but I think for me in general, this movie is really all about just these different characters and the fact that they are all given, you know, such attention. There's no real weak link. I guess if I had to pick a weak link, it would be his daughter's friend. What's the name of the friend?
The Ukrainian.
The friend from the beginning who we thought was a boyfriend, but isn't Sirius. That's right. Yeah, like Sirius, I guess, is maybe probably the least developed, but even he has like a pretty distinctive personality, and like by the end of the movie he says things that we could kind of associate with him and so forth. And just seeing like things like, although the writing is at times kind of on the nose in terms of like spelling out like, this is my background, this is what happened to me and whatnot, even before those moments come, we can see in the way these characters act, you know, what's going on. Or like Emmenthaler. God, I just gotta have a list of names in front of me. Emmenthaler, exactly. Like Emmenthaler, another great character, just his like, and I don't know if we're ever given like a specific traumatic backstory for him, but just like seeing his reactions to things, seeing his like fixation on like the monitor, and his eagerness to partake in this bloodthirsty quest, his like hunger for his lust for revenge, which when he actually encounters it in real life immediately horrifies him. Another thing I love about it is that it takes this plot, this kind of archetypal story of like revenge, you know, like the movie poster and the title makes it look like it's going to be Taken or John Wick or something, right? And while, you know, preserving those beats basically makes the revenge itself, you know, unpalatable. I mean, as Connor said, it kind of has its cake and eats it too with the ending a little bit, but it basically says like, what would this guy actually be like? You know, the John Wick character, the Liam Neeson character, the badass ex-military guy who can take apart a gun in 30 milliseconds. And what would this person actually be like? And taking that seriously, which is basically the basis of deconstructing a story. But in general, I just think this movie really succeeds at kind of what it sets out to do. And I find it like a tremendously like cozy and heartwarming movie as well. Like I find it's very, ultimately when I walk away from it, it feels very sweet, you know, and just like the slow accumulation of these characters that are all damaged in different ways, loving and supporting each other. You know, it's a little schmaltzy, a little cheesy perhaps, but I think the movie earns it. I think the movie does a good job, you know, threading that needle really better than it had any right to do. So again, I can understand, depending on what you're bringing to the movie and what sort of expectations you have for it, if you're expecting a Christmas movie, perhaps you'll be disappointed. But I don't know what else to tell you. So, but
Can
yeah,
I jump in?
Of course.
Yeah,
What do you got to say?
I have one gripe that is more salient than others, and it's the ending. I really appreciate what you're saying, and then I think to the ending, and I think about how, you know, we've spent the entire movie talking about these stakes and fleshing out these characters and their real humanness, like Emmenthaler's inability to kill, right? And then at the end, we have Mads Mikkelsen, who's clearly outnumbered, and it feels like it's going to be like a Gran Torino type of situation where somehow he'll save his daughter, but he's going to be fucked, right? He's going to die. And then these three, you know, 4chan users take out their fucking M10s and kill a whole biker gang, you know, in perfect spraying patterns. What the fuck is that? That was the weirdest thing. I mean, talk about discord, right? Like, I did not think they did not earn that ending. That, I mean, you're throwing the stakes away. Like, what's the value of a human life? Why? What is the motivation? I guess, you know, they're killing to be because they're being threatened, but it's just kind of like, I don't know. It's irreverent. It's flippant. It's cheesy, super fucking cheesy. That ending, in my opinion, untenable. Right? Like, does anybody else have a gripe with that ending? Like, because I wanted the ending where Mads Mikkelsen dies. Like, I wanted that. Like, he deserved to die. Like, to me, like, I felt like that movie would have been perfect, right? Like, he's about to turn his relationship around with his daughter. He was really about to turn a corner, but he can't, right? It's too late. These actions have already been set forth. And instead, the nerds kill the bikers, and then we have a Christmas get together at the end where they all give each other gifts. It just felt on the nose. And that's where I got detached, right? Like, it's kind of like a sparring session, and I'm getting in close, and then they throw that right hook to back me off. And I'd love somebody to explain, you know, their perspective on the ending and how they think that plays. Like, and then the geeks get revenge and use, you know, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, I get what you're saying. And I think as far as like I don't think it's totally thematically incongruous, because again, like in this context, like those guys are clearly like, it's like basically a self-defense situation. You know, I guess I can seeing the image of the nerdy guys blowing the bikers away to be, you know, you can find that a little cheesy, sure. I think that I just emotionally watching it at this point had built up such goodwill for these characters that I can forgive it. I didn't personally find it cheesy. I mean, it's heightened, certainly, it's over the top, certainly, but that whole last sequence kind of is already. And I like the happy ending. I like that he gets to, reconnect with his daughter. I think the ending you're talking about is a very different movie. Although I'm the one who wants that ending, but I don't know.
No, and that's fair, right? Because that's like maybe I was expecting, it's all about expectations. And I think there is some value, like you're saying. But anyways, I want to hear others on that, on the ending. I think Connor had something.
No, I did. One thing popped into my head. One word: miraculous. It is miraculous, right? That they managed to shoot them all. Now, notice they do shoot Matilda. She gets shot in like the shoulder. So it's not as if they're completely glossing over the fact that this is hard to believe and that they're not great shots and that they're not trained. But there's something miraculous in that final moment where, as Kirk said, that is totally the expectation. And they totally want you to think that Marcus is going to have to sacrifice himself, and that this is the price he's going to have to pay for his misdeeds, for his taking things, for being violent, for his kind of evil nature. But miraculously, we are freed from that, from the consequences, right? Kind of reminds me a little bit of a certain story of Christianity, right? Where like we have like a fallen nature, but then like Christ sacrifices himself. I mean, here, like I guess Mads could have been the Christ-like figure who sacrificed himself so the family can be saved. But miraculously, like we don't have to make that sacrifice by some miracle, right? And obviously, this is a story, whether you believe it's true or not is up to you. But like the fact that like we're saved in that last instant, right, from like what we know is the consequence of our like sinful nature, right? And like that kind of, it is cheesy, it's miraculous, it's hard to believe, but that I think is that little intrusion of the coming back of the kind of the happenstance theme. This is happenstance that they managed to shoot them all and not kill Matilda, but like I said, it just connects thematically, right, to me. And it feels earned in that moment, I guess, maybe because I'm rooting for the guys. I love the nerds coming out and just saving the day in the nick of time, and it feels right to me too, but maybe without all of that like Christian stuff, I don't know, but that just popped into my head.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if I could counter the Christian allusions within the movie that Connor brought up, but I will say, like, my initial impulse is to agree with Kirk, especially about that ending. But I'll take it even further and say that to me, the film not only has its cake and eats it too, but it has alongside it a plate of cookies. It has some milk as well, and alongside that are croissants and chocolate croissants. And the reason I say that is because as I watch this movie, to me, much of it is supposed to be about how men, largely, thanks to a number of different, reasons, whether they be societal or personal, have a very hard time expressing and understanding and connecting at an emotional level. And the film loves to poke fun at this, from what I remember, whether it's Leonard talking about his 4,000 hours or whatever it is of therapy, and yet, he similarly has difficulty. I think it's Sirius with the blue hair who talks about how like the dad has been through trauma of war and the trauma of the losing the mother, or the wife in this case, the mother of his daughter, and like he can't quite figure things out until he breaks down and cries. But really, to me, one of my crises or complaints here is to take it even further than the Kirk, because to me, the film gives its way out by defaulting towards that violence and defaulting towards the writers wanting revenge in the overall third of the movie, the final third. To me, the proper exit for this movie, if you really want to teach a story about men getting over themselves and learning to actually understand emotion and emotional part, it has to actually move away from the violence. And what it does instead is merely suggest violence, recuperation, the bonding over violence, the bonding of military style men, whether they be nerds or not, is once again this archaic mode of a way forward, which is why they come in like a military unit and are able to execute these riders and move forward. But what we've lost in that moment is the value of a human life, the value of therapy, and the value of simply emotionally understanding someone else.
No, that's No, because the reason that they win in the end is not because they're well trained. I mean, Emmentaler, right, was the one who just naturally good at assembling the gun. They're not well trained. They're shooting randomly. They hit Matilda. So it's not like they became bonded because of their, well, I guess, okay, they do come together in this revenge quest, right? They come for the revenge because of their needs and all their problems that they think this revenge is going to somehow fix. But what is it that really keeps them together? It's because they become friends, because they've been bonding, right? Because they've had those cozy Christmassy moments as like a weird family of like, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or whatever, that they managed to come together in that moment. I know that's like not like a literal interpretation of like the fact that they're all able to shoot them all, but like I just think that like that's the core. I think, and that's maybe the purpose of them being sort of almost incompetent in their shooting. I mean, surprisingly competent, but the fact that it's random is so that it's not reinforcing that idea that we've trained them and that in the end, toxic, violent masculinity is preserved. I think it's obviously the idea is that this is the only solution to the problem, which they've gotten themselves into through that violent, toxic masculinity, but like, that's kind of like, they've kind of brought it on themselves. And it's like, the idea is kind of like the bikers are kind of similar. The bikers themselves are kind of like broken men, who are all balding and like, they clearly need to have this thing, this is their way of solving their problems.
But don't we feel that the film kind of ends up in a little trap of itself there anyway? Because it doesn't matter how well trained they are if they're not trained. The violence, once they start acting on it, feels very random in that it's even able to hit the daughter. Yet they're still able to come out and persevere on top of that. And so really the only victim of any sort of violence is the people who deserve it in a quote unquote sense of the film's logic, the writers and the daughter. And so it doesn't matter, right? It's in the case of the practitioners of violence are always able to escape as long as they have the camaraderie of men and the camaraderie of surprise, which is truly the great tactic that you have here.
Well, but they also all get shot.
Yes.
They all get shot, except for Badashka, who is the only like non-toxic man. He's kind of plays a feminine role. So they all do get shot initially. And then Matilda also gets shot. So she has to suffer the consequences of something she didn't really do. It's true. But again, if it's trying to underline that point that like it was kind of accidental, they kind of got lucky, and again, I guess, ultimately to avoid the implication that it's like they're super well trained or whatever, I mean, obviously if Mads' character hadn't been like a super commando, it wouldn't have played out quite like that, but I think they were trying to account for the objection you would have, Anthony, which obviously makes sense because the movie does have its cake and eat it too.
Yeah, and I understand the complaint. Honestly, I can see how it's as an ending, it's a little bit contrived. It's kind of the classic, the Deus Ex Machina, where they come in off stage and save the day, or Han Solo coming back to save Luke, that kind of thing. And I think emotionally it works and it's justified on those grounds. However, I can see how it's sort of like the idea that it's a miracle. I think thematically it does work for the movie in the sense that because the whole movie is about kind of random chance and these things just kind of transpiring kind of randomly. In this case, we got a happy accident. So I think it kind of works on that level. However, I do think that it's a little too cute, a little too clean, like perhaps, it's a little convenient. But when I'm watching it, I really don't care. But I can see how someone would question that narrative choice. But I don't know that I would change it either. You know what I mean? I'll ultimately like it, while acknowledging that, I can see how it could be seen as a bit contrived. But I want to pick up on something else Anthony said, because I think it's important and I can't believe I forgot. But the idea of just like the idea of men, this is a movie all about kind of men and men dealing with their feelings, which is another thing I think I really appreciate and admire about this movie. The fact that you have men who have all been, traumatized in various ways that all have different methods of sort of dealing with it. The fact that two of the men in this movie are victims of sexual assault, this is something that is very rarely presented, in film and television. So I thought that angle of the movie was interesting as well. I don't know. I don't know if you had any further thoughts on that, or if that basically sums it up for you, Anthony, or anybody.
Well, just on that theme, I mean, I think that is something I really like about it too. Interesting, this like the trio of Mads films that are Danish. The Danish Mads films obviously kind of go hand in hand, but like that are about like like men and stuff, and like the crisis of men or something like that. But I really like this because I don't know, it represents so many different kinds of like things and types of like male excess, and like we have the computer guy, the angry computer guy, we have the angry army guy, we have the the sort of like nice guy who harbors all this trauma, right? We have this like, I just think it kind of covers this gamut of kinds of things, right, that men can go through and how they deal with it. But that's basically just saying exactly what Tony just said, so I have nothing really to add. But I was trying to think of, I just love like how Mads' character, just for instance, this is as a sketching like a portrait of like these types of people, right? Marcus, his particular brand of atheism, I love it. Just feels so somehow right on target for like an army guy, that he would have that perspective, and you'd think it would be like he doesn't want his daughter to believe in God either because it would be stupid. Uh, I, I like all these characters because I see elements of them in my world, and they're familiar to me somehow. Not because I have issues, of course.
No, of course, none of us have issues, for the audience at home, to be clear. But yeah, no, I definitely like it. Feels so real, and Mads' character, like I'm nothing like this guy, but like there are moments when I just feel so like I can relate to him so powerfully. Like I don't have kids yet, at least, but just like his conversations with his daughter, like I feel so like painfully real to me. Like I can just see myself having those interactions, like in terms of like doing or saying the wrong thing, and like the desperately trying to make it right, or just like kind of like when he's like, what can I do to just make it right? Like just like very like what do I
I'll make spaghetti bolognese. Like, oh, Dad, 5 anymore. I love that. Yeah.
I like to when Sirius comes over, he immediately apologizes, and he's like, "Oh, I understand. You don't have anything to apologize for. You're going through a hard time." And he's like, "Oh, okay." He's just like, "All right, problem solved. I've made up with this guy." But anyway, so yeah, I definitely can relate to that. But I don't know if you guys had more, Anthony or Kirk, had any thoughts on this general topic.
Well, just final thought on the whole male bonding thing, and because Connor brought up the religious scene, I suppose, where Mads Mikkelsen's character is telling the daughter not to believe in it. I think he even has the line like, or when she tells him, she's like, "Grandfather believed in Jesus and God," and he's like, "Well, your grandfather was an idiot." But there seems to be something interesting, I think, too, which is to play on that, which is the overall film. If I understood you and Connor right, Tony, about being something about randomness at times, and the kind of ways that you can't quite pinpoint things to algorithms. You can't quite always find connections and consequences, because sometimes life is just filled with all these challenging random moments that infiltrate everyday situations. Part of that's such a thing. And I think part of that wants to challenge is like the traditional male idea of rationality. Like, men, of course, the idea that things always have an answer or can be rationally absolved. And yet the film really wants to push a kind of, in a way, I think what Connor was saying about the Jesus connection is quite actually true. There's a level of faith that the movie wants to espouse that men, I think, seem especially hesitant to, which is the faith of giving yourself up to just everyday life, which is something I think the daughter has in the kind of beginning. And it's kind of a lesson that carries for these men by the time they get to the end of the movie, which is the faith of just giving into each other as friends, companions, and they're able to get around the Christmas tree, I suppose, because of that. I'm not really, saying anything I think intelligent or clear. I'm just I'm literally speaking out my thoughts as trying to figure out this movie out loud. So sorry if I took up the space, but also Kirk, if you have anything.
I just think there's, I've been listening, ingesting, digesting everything you've all been saying about masculinity. I think the critique of toxic masculinity, if there is one here, I think there's elements of a critique. I think it would have been more cutting or respectable if there had been a certain consequence for the recklessness of this whole endeavor, and there wasn't a consequence. to the extent that they're able to enjoy a normal Christmas. None of these individuals are traumatized by the fact that they killed other people. They killed human beings. And they're all sitting around, let's hear the French horn. Let's, have a cup of tea. And, the big reveal of the film, right, is that the alleged assailant or person who kind of finagled the freight train and caused the accident, it's a case of mistaken identity. And they don't have to reap the consequences of that. What are the consequences? They get shot, I guess. So there's minimal consequence. It feels so much like there's an aspect missing there, right? Like they don't have to look in the mirror. And maybe it ties back to like, thematically speaking, they're like, oh, we have to end this movie on a happy note, right? And like, what was Mr. Jensen's motivation for that, right? And but in terms of truly like critiquing some of these social themes, to me, I would have hoped that this senseless killing would have led to more than just a bonding experience, right? Like, and I'm not saying that in terms of like in a moralistic sense. Like, I'm more saying that from a selfish perspective of an observer and somebody who wants to feel something that speaks somewhat true to how I experienced it.
It would have been more like narratively satisfying for you if they had suffered consequences.
Yeah, even if like one of them had died.
Right, sure.
Like,
so if they had the happy ending maybe, but one of them had died or it was more bittersweet, you're saying maybe that would have played better for you.
Yeah, I don't know what did the reveal accomplish. I guess it started the healing process for Mads's character, right? I guess that like he could no longer attribute the death of his wife to any specific evil or suspect or target that he could pursue. So then he had to like come full face with the randomness of it. And I guess that's what it fulfilled, was that little, and it led to the scene with Otto in the barn, where he's reflecting on his own or his daughter's death and his culpability in it. So I don't know. I think for me, just like I appreciate a movie that takes these types of narrative risks. Often you're looking at a movie and you're like, well, does it do something well? And for me, a growth edge is actually appreciating movies that do something new, right? Even if it doesn't go off in the way that might feel narratively satisfying, right? Like you said, Tony. So I can appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you, Kirk. All right. Well, we're getting on to it's getting later now. I think it might be time to kind of wrap it up. And if you guys want to do maybe final thoughts and then a vote, why don't we go in?
We'll bite the bullet on this one. Just do it in the order.
Yeah, we'll just do it in the order I called it originally. So, Kirk, what's it going to be?
Yeah, I'm an over yeser. I think if we tallied everything except for some, ones that were off-putting like Cachet and stuff where I was low no, but recently I've been yesing a lot. And I think it's a film that like I just have to trust there's an element of subjectivity here. And even if I can recognize that a film has a certain level of ingenuity and novelty and heartfelt composition, if it doesn't speak to me, that's valid. Like that's a valid part of my critique, I think. It doesn't mean necessarily I have a certain shortcoming. It might mean I can look to expand my perspective in the future, but I can't necessarily change how I feel in this moment. So I'm not going to try to, and I guess I'll give it a soft no. I think that's the very first time I've ever said a soft no. So, that's almost like a yes, Tony.
All right. And he's given yes to movies he said he hated. So that's really tough. No, I'm kidding. I wasn't expecting you to say yes from how you were talking about it, Kirk. So, and obviously, you got to follow your heart. So, Anthony, all right, I'm in the I'm in the guillotine. Go ahead.
I really wonder if you flipped Kirk and I, would Kirk have, flipped his answer? Just always a curious, what if? I think, overall, Tony, I hear yours, I hear Connor's arguments. It's kind of like a transit moment with you where it's like, I hear this movie that's being described and I didn't quite see it, but I would have loved to have seen it the way you guys did. So I got to say, like in the trilogy of Mads Mikkelsen, projects about Mads Mikkelsen recovering or sheltering his child, whether it be Rogue One or Death Stranding, I prefer the other two. And this is kind of on the end. But I came around a bit. Maybe with another day or two would be a yes. But I got to say, like Kirk, soft no.
All right. And we will reconvene every couple days to discuss this movie again. So maybe Anthony will be down on that day. So, all right, Connor. It is not in the 706, but you should still vote.
I'll talk about toxic masculine. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, so it's a yes for me. I want to address what Kirk said. It's very interesting. For me, like I would say that it's almost like, for me, I would say that the narratively less satisfying thing would be to have them really deal with the consequences. For me, like what I mean by that is like, to me, it's like it's the crowd pleasing thing, right? To have them all win in the end, because we've been asked really only to sympathize with them. And the way I think that Jensen like deals with this is he goes out of his way to give you reasons to basically justify that he can kill these people, right? So for instance, like I think this is maybe a little bit regressive, right? Maybe kind of defeats the purpose of the movie, but I think it's like this is not really a defense. I mean, like, I think you're right, Kirk, from like I do think from like a moralistic perspective, we should be like suspicious of this, but like why is Bodashka in it? I don't really love this. I don't really like how the Bodashka like tied up is kind of played for laughs. Like that kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way. But that's kind of like when Bodashka appears in that moment, you kind of say, phew, okay. I mean, like from like a writing perspective, you say, phew, okay, he killed a bad guy, right? He was like abusing this man, right? So like, and then the whole setup is that things have been set in motion such that they're no matter what, they're going to try to kill this family. So, now they're justified in fighting back and killing them. So, yeah, I think that's the idea. But you're right. He totally avoids the actual like reckoning with like, what does it mean to kill that guy? Like, it's not good to snap that guy's neck. Obviously, it's like not a good thing, but he kind of gets away with it using kind of screenwriting techniques or using kind of like the sleight of hand of, of film writing. But, anyway, that was just my thought. But yeah, I really love this movie. Again, I love it for that, like the writerly skill on display. And I do just, it hits me. It works for me,
Yes, it works for me as well. So anyway, it is what it is. They can't all be winners with this fickle bunch, but that's all right. Okay, so the next segment, the fan favorite segment, the others will pitch movies to me for me to pick from for next time. And the way it works is once someone has claimed a decade, so say Kirk picks a movie from the 90s will be off the table for the others. So the interest isn't going first. But so who went? Does anyone know who went least recent?
Because I wrote it. Because I picked Titanic, and Kirk picked you, Tony.
Oh yeah, Connor's on a bit of a cold streak. So, all right, Connor, you go ahead.
Okay, men. Okay, enough of the men. All right, there's too much of it. All of this hand wringing and introspection about being a man and toxic masculine. I've had enough. And also, guys, it's a sausage fest in the 706. Let's be honest. We only have one female director, I think. Am I incorrect? So
Sofia Coppola.
We have Coppola, and When Harry Met Sally was written.
It was written by Nora Ephron, but it's directed by man. Yeah,
directed by men. Okay.
Well, it also didn't get in for what it's worth.
It didn't get it.
Tony spited it.
I got all the. Okay. Well. Okay, we have more of a problem. So, I'd like to recommend Mary Herron's American Psycho. Of course, I'm kidding because, again, we're back in the men. I'm sorry. It's more men. American Psycho from the year 2000. Mary Herron directed. Adaptation of the Bret Easton Ellis novel, famous for, in fact, criticized by a lot of readers at the time for being kind of a toxically masculine, sort of like incorporating, kind of unabashedly embodying, this sort of, what they would have called this kind of sexism, chauvinism of the time, and kind of this hyper masculinity, what have you. Of course, we know, and obviously through knowing the film, we know, right, that it is sort of a critique. It's a statement about the culture of the 1980s, whatever. I guess I'm kind of front loading all the interpretation, but I think we've all kind of encountered this movie to some degree or other. I think it's a great fit for the podcast. I think there's a lot to discuss, and how can you just not love those moments? It's just a movie that really sticks with you. I just saw a meme about it was like about the whole like business card thing, but it was about anime or something. Anyway, I love it. Can't get enough. I really want to discuss it with you guys, and let's do it.
Very nice. I watched this like 2 weeks ago, by the way. But who's going next, Connor?
Who will go next? I think Kirk should go next.
All right. That's a good pick, Connor. Great movie. Yeah, this is tough. I guess I'll go with Pi, Darren Aronofsky. Kind of interesting one. We haven't done an Aronofsky. I know there's some people who think he's insufferable, especially like the Tumblr crowd. They're like anti, a lot of his practices. They think the whale is very toxic. Maybe we could talk about that, right? Maybe we could talk about what it is about him. Is it just like, does he get off on concern or suffering? And I know there's a million critiques about his work, but Pi, what is it? Mathematician, New York City. It's in black and white. Really, really kind of gritty is the first and last word I would use to describe this film. And one that, I would like to see since having moved to New York. And, I've been in New York for 7 years. So it doesn't feel foreign. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I'm sure 3 people of your esteem have all seen it. So yeah, it'd be nice to get an Aronofsky for a nomination, and why not Pi? So anyways, that's my choice.
Why not Pi? I wonder if this is the closest 2 movies have been since we've instituted our decade rule, because they're 98 and 2000 apparently. So right on the edge there. So all right, Anthony, is your movie going to be from that same era?
Yeah, I thought, Pi was 2000 as well, but I'm wrong. So, I think Connor makes a good point, thinking about who we don't have. And I think what we need more is white male directed films in this list. So I got to go with one from the 1970s. It's a kind of interesting filmmaker, I suppose, and that major kind of influence, but not quite, I feel like, as big of a name. It's Hal Ashby. And I'm going to nominate 1979's Being There, starring Peter Sellers, which I feel like Connor has seen. I don't know if you've seen, Tony or Kirk, but in case you haven't, basically he plays a kind of, let's say, kind of an adolescent-minded person who kind of, when his caretaker dies, he's a gardener, and he's kind of like all of a sudden thrown into the world in the kind of late 70s world. And what we have is kind of a bumbling person going from situation to situation in this truly hilarious and sad, melancholy, dark parody of Americana. I hesitate to describe it this way because for most people it sounds like I'm insulting it, but I mean this in the most kind way possible. It is truly the great version of Forrest Gump without the kitschiness and the kind of, knick-knack personality of that movie. Hal Ashby is a much smarter director. The actor, Peter Sellers, is much smarter at this role. And I think what we have is kind of a gem that's been kind of resurrected, but I still think is overlooked. So I think it's worth doing.
All right, very cool. So in that same order, we'll do our rebuttals before I make my final pick.
Okay, well, I feel like it's kind of an uphill battle, seeing as Tony's seen it so recently. I'm not sure how much of a chance I have, but even though I've been his loyal bulldog all episode, this is quite a twist of fate. Let me just say, note to all future employers, I'm not trying to make light of the male bias, right? Obviously, I do think, right, we need more female directors. We need to give more female directors a shot. Obviously, it's kind of awkward that this is such a very male centric movie. Of course, like my point would be, Mary Herron, I think, has a spin on this story. Frankly, I haven't read the book. I'll read it in time for the episode. Okay, Tony, I'll read it.
All right, very good.
Let's see. First feature for Darren, first feature film, and it shows. It takes a lot of creative risks. I feel like coming from this film, right, the film we just watched, Riders of Justice, not many cinematic flourishes. So let's get back to the craft, Tony. Let's go back to the nuts and bolts, the angles, the cameras, the dollies, the gaffers, the sexually promiscuous producers. Anyways, Pi is my choice.
Okay, and Anthony, round us out.
It's difficult. Let's see. Yeah, Pi would be cool, I think. Maybe I feel like if I had to, though, maybe The Fountain or The Wrestler might be a more fun episode, I think, to talk about than Pi. But I haven't seen that one in years, so maybe Kirk is onto something. American Psycho is fine. I never quite gravitated towards the movie, I suppose. But maybe I was missing something, and maybe I need Connor's illuminating analysis of Mary Herron's techniques to bring out something in that movie. I think Hal Ashby's being there kind of checks off what they're both sort of getting at. Hal Ashby, of course, is a master craftsman, a true, I think, in my opinion, genius and influence in that era of filmmaking, and especially seen today. I think it's also kind of fun to go back to something that's in somewhat of a kind of comedy or satire, but is also kind of a strict drama again, and a drama that really gets us back to something that we haven't really done in a bit. We've had Titanic, the melodrama. We've had Riders of Justice, a kind of mixed. I almost forgot the title. Mixed film. And yeah, we had Fright Night before, but I think going back to a kind of being there, kind of like I said before, an overlooked but kind of rediscovered film is maybe something to talk about.
Okay. I like that you laughed at Riders of Justice like it was the My Little Pony movie or something. How preposterous we would even consider it for this canon. I know. This is legitimately really hard. These are all really appealing. American Psycho, I do love. I think it's like really, I always was kind of like torn on it, but now I'm pretty pro. I think it's a pretty delectable little morsel. It's just really fun to watch. And I think that, like, looking at the movies we've done, it's like, how have we not done American Psycho? Like, I've thought about pitching it before. I have seen Pi. I don't remember it too well. I really like Aronofsky though, and I like the idea of doing, I think we definitely want to do one of his movies soon. I think Pi is kind of an unconventional choice, and I think it's one that's kind of ripe for sort of discussion. I always like debut film. I love, really low budget, like micro budget films, and see like what a filmmaker who will go on to do much bigger things does with those like really early elements, like something like Following by Christopher Nolan. I think it's just really cool to see. So that would be cool to do. And then Being There, I have not seen, but I've had it recommended to me before, and I think your description sounded like really good and really intriguing. I love that idea of mixing those tones, and I love the idea of like a good version of Forrest Gump. Like that does actually sound extremely appealing, which we already kind of had with Little Big Man. That was kind of like a good Forrest Gump. For our very first inductee. But mulling it over, despite having just seen it, I think I am going to go American Psycho, because I think we just got to do an episode on it. I think we'll all have things to say about it and enjoy it.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you, Tony, for picking it. I think obviously it's like it's a standard kind of film bro movie. Interestingly, often people forget like that Mary Herron directed. It's just someone doesn't get married, doesn't get married. So she doesn't get mentioned like as much, right? As the director of this movie. Yeah, I think it's kind of a known thing. Only female directed film that like a film bro can mention is American Psycho. I think we can delve into that a little bit. I want to make that a theme. I also want to say I haven't seen Pi. I do love Being There. Sorry, I was so transfixed by my own joke I was trying to make. Sorry about that. I love being there, but we'll it's cold comfort because I win. American Psycho coming up next. Anthony, would you play us out?
I'll have what she's having.